What's going on, everyone? TC Ty Killer checking in, and thanks for checking out Week 7, my college football top 25. It's going to be an exciting weekend, hopefully a lot of interesting matchups that could go either way. And last week in Week 6 of the football season, we kind of had the same thing go, and a few interesting, exciting games that came down to the wires, and some interesting officiating calls as well. One definitely puzzling, the Texas at Iowa State game. Iowa State, I would say, would be robbed after it looked like they stripped a ball on one of the last Texas drives. That could have been ran back for a touchdown and sealed the victory, but it was overturned. Not really overturned, the play stood because they called it that he was down on the field. And then Texas would go on to fumble again next play and then score and ultimately win the game. Another similar situation happened with Northwestern and Ohio State, and then a Stanford versus Washington. Those games, you could say that the teams need to play better, but if it comes down to it, you don't want the officiating pretty much calling the game, which might have happened in that one. So let's get on with it. Last week in Week 6, I went 20-1 straight up and 11-10 against the spread for a season record of 105-9 for the straight up picks. So hopefully I can continue that one. I think most of these ones are pretty easily called for straight up picks. The spread's a little bit harder, obviously, but hopefully to extend that. There are some good games that I see on the schedule, and right now you are seeing one of the better games that I think is going to happen this weekend, and that's Louisville versus Rutgers, an AAC matchup. I'm trying to stray away from the SEC and the Big Ten because I did them the past few weeks, as well as Pac-12, because I obviously do them in my Pac-12 predictions, which will be coming out tomorrow in time for the USC-Arizona game. So let's get on with it. If you haven't watched one of my videos, I usually tell you guys before, but Reddit is where I like to kind of hang out for the CFB and also post my predictions. I'm going to be doing predictions, just a real quick thing at the end after I kind of explain a teeny bit of each team going on here. So I guess let's just get into it. At number 25, I have UCF, dropping a couple spots in my poll just because other teams did a little bit better as they got in as the next team did, if that makes sense. But UCF also won a close game against a pretty weak Memphis team. So after a few weeks of stunning performances at Penn State, the upset win there, and then almost pulling it off against South Carolina, they come up a little bit, just bland in the state of Tennessee. They have this week off, so hopefully they can regroup before going on to their more tougher conference slate. But I'm having them at 25 right now, just on the fringe of going out or moving up into the safety spots of the top 25. At number 24, I have the newcomer, Missouri. They're looking actually pretty decent after a thrashing of Vanderbilt 51-28. I had Vanderbilt I had them about 28 in my preseason rankings, and I really thought they were going to do good, especially after that Ole Miss game. Really resilient and seemed to be a little tough opponent, capable of some upsets this year, but doesn't look like it's going to be their year after a great year last year. Missouri 5-0 right now. Pretty good wins. No real close wins or puzzling score lines so far. They have a big task this weekend, finally getting to a ranked game. They're going to Athens to take on the Georgia Bulldogs, coming off a close win against Tennessee last week. I'm going with Georgia in this one, 34-21. It might be close in the first half, and if that's the case, Missouri might be able to be emotional enough to go up and get that upset. And a lot of people are saying Missouri is a surprise team right now, and it sure looks that way. But we'll have to see how they do against some real competition from the top dogs in the SEC. At number 23, I have Arizona State, dropping about 6 spots in my rankings. I think they dropped out of the AP poll, but they went to Arlington to play Notre Dame at a neutral site game this past weekend, and I don't know what happened to them. They should have beat Notre Dame. They didn't. They almost came back and won it, but threw a pick 6 in the last 5 minutes or so, and didn't really seal the deal then, but it definitely was a thing that could have cost them the game right there. They pretty much let Tommy Rees walk all over them through the passing. That's the first game I think I've watched of Notre Dame pretty much full through, and he looks pretty good actually in that game. So big props to them. They might be making a return to the top 25 depending on how this week's games go. So Arizona State looked pretty good, except for the Stanford game the past few weeks. They looked okay, but they didn't look like a top 25 team against Notre Dame. They go to Colorado. They stay home and host Colorado, and hopefully get their slate on track before Washington comes to town next weekend, or the weekend after next weekend. So week 8. But I'm going with Arizona State 52-17 in this one. Number 22, I have Fresno State. They're on a bye this week. They went to Idaho to play in the KB Dome. 61-14 was the final score. Big win over a pretty bad FBS team. They've played so far so good. Beat Rutgers, beat Boise State. Almost blew a huge lead at Hawaii, but again on the road, a few hours away. I guess that would be acceptable, and I'll let them slide on that one. At number 21, I have Wisconsin. They are taking on number 19 Northwestern this weekend after a bye week, after playing Ohio State pretty closely, but losing by a touchdown. I like Wisconsin, and the only blemish on their resume right now is a controversial loss at Arizona State. The Ohio State game is pretty expected, especially being I think they're in the Horseshoe. Yeah, they're at the Horseshoe. But this weekend, I have them at home in Camp Randall, taking on number 19 Wildcats. I'm going to get them the upset win, 31-27. I don't know if it's really considered an upset. I think they're favored by 10 points against a ranked team. So, actually, I think they might be ranked in AP poll. I don't have that notes right now. But yeah, 31-27 Wisconsin over Northwestern is my prediction. Number 20, I have Oklahoma State continuing their slide after that West Virginia loss. They almost lose to Kansas State, one of the worst, I don't want to say worst, but one of the not as good teams in the Big 12. They do get a bye, so hopefully they regroup and come out swinging. They got a jam-packed rest of the schedule with Texas, Oklahoma, Baylor on the horizon as well. So they definitely need to get their kinks ironed out after the past 2 weeks have been just not good for them, to say it kindly. At number 19, I have Texas Tech taking on Iowa State, who almost beat Texas last weekend. Should have beat Texas last weekend. Texas Tech coming off that Kansas win, 54-16 on the road. They're looking pretty good right now as well. Not really any close calls besides their TCU game, where TCU is ranked, and pretty much I think that was the game that bumped Texas Tech into the rankings. I have them winning a close one in Lubbock, 24-20 against the Iowa State Cyclones. At number 18, I have South Carolina. I think they got jumped by 2 teams this past week after a close victory against Kentucky in their own stadium. 35-28 was the score. I was rooting for Kentucky to come back and win it, but alas, they don't. So just like Oklahoma State, 2 close calls the past 2 weeks, and they traveled to Arkansas, who looks okay, not great, especially as far as the SEC is concerned, but I think still a formidable opponent, and we'll let them get a little bit of practice on as they have a couple big games on the horizon as well, such as Florida. I'm going with South Carolina 28-14 over Arkansas. Number 17, I have Oklahoma, and I think they're playing in Dallas, playing the Texas Longhorns. They are coming off a TCU 20-17 victory, and then 2 weeks removed from that ranked win over number 22 at the time, Notre Dame. So they're looking pretty good right now. The TCU game was a little bit closer than I would want it to be, but Texas isn't exactly playing well right now. They should be able to score some points, but it's a rivalry game, and I don't see this one getting too out of hand. I'm still going with Oklahoma to beat the Longhorns 28-17. Number 16, I have Michigan. They are traveling to Penn State, and this is one of the games that I think people should keep their eye on. Penn State not exactly looking great at the moment, but still a tough venue, and Michigan is has been known to have some close games this season with Connecticut and Akron. 7 points combined in those 2 wins. They did do a little bit better last week against Minnesota, but Minnesota did not have their coach on the sidelines due to a seizure. I think it's going to be really, really close up in Happy Valley. 35-31, I'm going with the Wolverines on that 4-point victory. At number 15, I have Northwestern. They traveled to Wisconsin. I already talked about this game a little bit. I'm going with Wisconsin still on the upset, 31-27. Northwestern, I would say probably drained after that game day appearance and the Ohio State game where it looked like they could be able to pull off the upset. And then that controversial call on 4th and 1, I think it was 4th and 2. Where it looked like they had the first down, but there was not enough evidence to support that claim. And they fumbled in the end zone when the clock went to 0 and ultimately lost by 10. And they haven't looked extremely well either. 35-21 against Maine in Week 4 and 38-17 against Western Michigan in Week 3. And so I guess that's my reasoning behind a Wisconsin upset this weekend. Wisconsin, I think, is looking really good. And I just think they're going to do it. Northwestern has outstayed their stay in the top 15. At number 14, I have Miami. They are on a bye after defeating Georgia Tech 45-30. And they're looking pretty good as well since pretty much the starting of the season and their Florida upset. They've been just rolling opponents. I don't know if you would call a 15-point victory over Georgia Tech rolling them, but 77-7 against Savannah State and 49-21 at South Florida. I'm not sure who they play. I think Miami plays Virginia Tech the week after. So another big game on the horizon for a top 25 team. At number 13, I have Washington. Again, one of the bigger games of the weekend. Staying at home against the number 2 Oregon Ducks. This border war rivalry is going to be heated. Game day traveling to Seattle. And Oregon is looking to put their 10th victory in a row together. During that time, the smallest margin of victory was 17 points. So that's crazy. If Washington could get it within 17, that would be a victory. And if they could pull off the upset, that would be a huge, huge victory in itself and probably propel them back into the top 10 and maybe into a national title hope if other teams are to lose. And we get a couple of one-loss teams at the top of the BCS standings, which come out on Sunday. Washington had that upsetting loss at Stanford last weekend. They just got rocked on special teams, 250-ish yards against them on special teams, and basically 2 touchdowns from that. They outplayed Stanford otherwise, though, and if they would have just pulled that off in that last drive, they would be in the top 10 right now, and this would be even a bigger. It would be a huge game, even more so than it is now. But I'm going with the Ducks, unfortunately. 41-27. They will only lose by 14. But this might bump them back even a little bit more. And they have another possibly ranked game going down to Arizona State next weekend. At number 12, I have Texas A&M. They were on a bye last week, but they traveled to Oxford, Mississippi this weekend to face Ole Miss. And if Ole Miss maybe wouldn't have got... I can't really say that. I was going to say maybe if Ole Miss wouldn't got beat so bad at Alabama. I know 25-0 isn't that bad, but... And I guess Ole Miss left a lot of points on the board. They went for it when they could have kicked field goals. But that ain't going to cut it against Texas A&M. Texas A&M has a great offense, as we all know. But their defense is kind of putrid. But I don't know if Ole Miss will be able to keep up with scoring as them, because I think Texas A&M's defense is only really bad against the run, and right now I can't recall who Ole Miss's running back is, so maybe that is saying something. I think it might be close, but in the end, Texas A&M wins by 15 points, 42-27. At number 11, trying to crack the top 10 is Baylor, one of the more surprising teams. See, they were unranked by the AP poll coming into the season, and they have scored 69 points or more in their 4 games. They've already had their 2 byes, and last week they beat up a weak West Virginia team 73-42. The only concerning thing is they got scored on 42 points, but this weekend not a much more threatening foe in Kansas State. They are on the road, but I think Baylor has no problem with this matchup. I'm going 70-21 Baylor over the Wildcats. I know it's a kind of a loft prediction putting 70 on a Wildcats defense, but it's Baylor, so yeah, history will repeat itself, it looks like. At number 10, I have UCLA coming off a close victory against Utah, 34-27 after forcing 6 interceptions. They face California team, another high-flying air raid offense, looking pretty good. They did have a loss last weekend against WSU, and I don't think they're going to change that fortune against the Bruins. UCLA, great on offense. California, bad on defense. I do think California will score. They have a very potent offense. But UCLA is going to double their score. I'm going with the Bruins 55-24 over the Golden Bears. At number 9, I have Louisville going to face Rutgers. And like I said, this is the game you will be seeing on this video, on this commentary. I think Rutgers will score. And this might be a little bit too much because Louisville's defense hasn't really been tested all too much. They've only been scored on more than 7 points once, and that was against Kentucky. But Rutgers, I think, is a little better than Kentucky and would win that game, as we saw Rutgers win against Arkansas a few weeks ago. Louisville 49, Rutgers 35. At number 8, I have LSU against number 17th Florida. And LSU looked pretty good late in their game last week against Mississippi State. And then just a week removed from their loss at Georgia. Very close loss there. I think they're going to continue to be great on the offensive side. Florida is known as that defensive team in the SEC, which seems to be a little more offense-oriented this year. But I think LSU is the toughest team Florida's faced so far, and they will score more than any team they've faced so far. That includes Miami, who scored 21. I'm going with LSU on this one, 31-17. At number 7, I have Georgia. And like I mentioned earlier with Missouri, they're taking on, obviously, the Tigers. Georgia win a close one last week in overtime against Tennessee. They lost a whole bunch of starters. I think both their running backs are out this week. A wide receiver. They're really hurting right now, and that could definitely give Missouri the mental edge in this one. But it is in Athens, and I think they have a week to practice some new wide receivers and get some backup running backs some reps. So I don't think it will be particularly too close where Missouri's seeing an upset in the fourth quarter 5 minutes ago. I'm going with Georgia 34-21, like I said earlier. At number 6, I have Clemson taking on Boston College. Clemson destroyed Syracuse last weekend 49-14. It didn't even seem that close to me. That was one of the games I watched last weekend. I'm going with Clemson 44-17 in Death Valley. At number 5, I have Ohio State. They are on a bye this week after beating Northwestern in that close 40-30 game day game. At number 4, I have Florida State, also on a bye after destroying Maryland 63-0. I didn't really think Maryland was that good until they beat West Virginia a couple weeks ago, 37-0. I mean, that's still kind of talk point worthy. And then they got a few votes and got ranked in the AP poll last week, and then just come out and laid an egg against Florida State. So you can kind of say that's a statement win for Florida State, since Maryland did get ranked just in time for that matchup and completely dispatched them. They're going to feel good going into their bye week, and I have them 4th right now, definitely climbing because of that Maryland win. At number 3, I have Stanford, like I said and mentioned earlier, coming off that really physical back and forth game against Washington. They never trailed, but definitely were trading scores back and forth with the Huskies. They traveled to Utah, where UCLA was last weekend, and I don't know if this is going to be an easy one, but I think Stanford's defense will be the difference. In the UCLA-Utah matchup, it was mostly an offensive battle between Travis Wilson and Brett Hundley. This one's going to be the entire Stanford defense, and I think they'll be able to contain those guys for the Utes. I'm going with the Cardinal, 31-17 in this one, keeping it closer than I would normally say on maybe a neutral site because of the altitude and maybe the weather involved as well. At number 2, I have Alabama still. They beat an FC. I don't know. Is Georgia State an FCS or are they the transition team? I can't remember off the top of my head, but they won 45-30. No real challenge there. They traveled to Kentucky. Probably no real challenge there again. They'll probably cruise to a 6-0 record. I think LSU is coming up in a few weeks, 3 weeks or so. So still lots of time to game plan for them, as LSU will probably be their main challenge before going into the SEC championship if they were to win that game. At number 1, I still have Oregon. And like I said earlier when I was talking about the Huskies, they traveled to Seattle to take on Washington. Last week, Oregon beat Colorado 57-16. I'm not sure if DeAnthony Thomas will be back. I haven't heard anything, haven't looked it up. But if they do, Washington is going to have their hands full. If they got beat bad by Ty Montgomery, they're going to have a hard time with DeAnthony Thomas on the special teams. Hopefully that's an emphasis in practice for Steve Sarkisian and the Huskies. Oregon just too explosive. Their defense is good. Just too many playmakers on this team to lose this game. And like I said, 10 years since Washington has won. I think that game in 2003 was in November. So not quite 10 years, but 10 seasons if they go on to win it in Seattle on Saturday on national television on College Game Day. And I think it's going to happen, unfortunately. 41-27, Oregon takes that over. So there are my top 25 teams. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any huge discrepancies in your top 25 or arguments against my top 25 and stuff like that, be looking for the Pac-12 projections coming out tomorrow or maybe tonight. I would say rather tomorrow because that's when I usually get it out, Thursday, but I want to get it out in time for the USC-Arizona game. So there's that. Like I said, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like and subscribe if you like my top 25, and check back next week. Have a great weekend of games, and definitely be sure to check out that Oregon-Washington matchup. It's sure to be a good one.